All right. Good morning, everyone. And thanks so much for joining me in the studio this morning. We are here for our very first Sew With Me event of the year. The idea behind these videos is that we don't build enough time. I don't build enough time for sewing into my daily life. And so the idea is that we have these several times a month where we can sit together and sew. So the idea is that this is nothing formal. There is no formal instruction that we're doing. So I hope that if you have a project that you're working on and you could use a body double or a buddy to work with this morning, that you find this video helpful. So this morning I am working on, if I can find my pattern page, this morning I am working on the Bridget Garden quilt from my Flower Farm Sampler book, and I am remaking this project in my brand new wintry fabric collection. It's super hard to see here on screen. My Holly and Hearth fabric collection. And I love that this is one of those fabric collections that is wintry without being specifically holiday related, so that it can live on your couch all the way through the cold months into the spring. So I'm going to hop right in with sewing block 5 this morning. And it's looking like everything is working on my end as far as sound and volume and stuff. But if you're finding that you're having issues, you're welcome to kind of drop me a note into our chat. And I'm going to try and keep an eye on that back and forth. We were having a little bit of issues with our overhead camera this morning. I think that I've got it fixed, but this is casual and easy breezy. So if we can't get it working, then we will just focus on the sewing machine this morning. So I did take a little bit of time today and did a little bit of sewing machine maintenance, because this is the first time I am sitting down to my sewing machine all year. So I am working on starting on block 5. Oops, can we get that in there? Which is the Dahlia block, page 26 of our Flower Farm sampler. And I believe, don't quote me, but I thought that we had already published the video for this project. So if you're working along with me, you can find that on our Flower Farm sampler quilt along homepage. And I am just trying to find the page with my instructions. All right. There we go. As I was cutting yesterday, everything got all out of whack. So one of the things I was talking about was, as we're sitting down for the first time in our sewing space for the new year, it's a good idea to kind of take your sewing machine apart and give it a good thorough cleaning. Somebody recently recommended to me, these are these little mascara wands. These are really great for getting in under when you open your machine up and collecting some of the lint that collects there without pushing it or having it fall back down into your machine. So that was a really great way to kind of get things cleaned out this morning. I have a brand new needle in. I have my thread loaded. I forgot to check my bobbin, so we'll see how that goes. And I'm just gonna get sewing here right now, because I am working on some stitch and flip blocks in the book. I am going to be using my 1/4-inch piecing foot. The thing that I love about this Juki sewing machine, this is the TL 180 VP. The thing that I love about this machine is that it has this really great seam guide. We'll be talking a lot about using the seam guide in the year to come. And it's really fantastic. But the thing that I love about the guide is that it pivots just right out of the way. And so when you're working on your stitch and flip blocks, you can just pivot it out of the way and put your 1/4 inch piecing foot on. When you're working on some easy piecing where you don't really have to pin, but you want that 1/4 inch seam to be super spot on, then you can just move it right back in. And I realized as we're sitting here that I forgot, as I was cleaning this morning, to put my 1/4 inch seam guide on for our lineless diagonal seams. Oops. This is the 1/4 inch seam washi tape from Cluck Cluck Sew, which is super fantastic because it doesn't leave a sticky residue or anything on your machine. And so if, like me, you don't like taking the time to dry your 1/4 inch seams, this is a really great way to be able to mark or project your stitching seam onto the bed of your machine without having to mark all those diagonal lines. So I always cut a little bit of a notch out there so that it doesn't interfere with my feed dogs. And then, oops, I need a little bit more trimmed off. And so this washi tape has 3 lines, 2 red and 1 black. The red one is your stitching line and the black is the 1/4 inch seam on either side. And so what you're trying to do is get that stitching line right lined up with your needle. And then you can just lay it down on your machine bed, and then you can see exactly all the way projected out onto your machine bed where your seam is. And my camera keeps moving, so there we go. So there's the full line there. All right, looks like we have a little bit of a glare this morning. This is the first time we're filming from this angle, so we'll make sure as we move forward with those that that we get those fixed. So I spent yesterday afternoon starching my fabric. My mom got these cute little alphabet-y clips for me for Christmas from It's So Emma at Fat Quarter Shop, and they are just adorable. And so I got everything laid out and labeled, and I'm just going to count because I don't remember how many I cut. Okay. Those got a little rumpled by the clip. I think I might have clipped that one while it was still wet, so I'm going to just hop on over here. Just kind of give that edge a little bit of a press to get the rumple out. Okay. Okay, and so when I am sewing my lineless diagonal seams, I do like to start with the needle down, and then that way I can get right in there. And this may be getting in my way. We'll see if that starts bugging me. And so if you've never seen this diagonal seam tape for your lineless diagonal seams, it's amazing. So like I was saying earlier, that red line is your stitching line, and all you have to do to draw your stitcher, to stitch your stitch and flip corner, is line your first quarter up with the needle and then keep this further corner lined up with your red line. That's your stitching line. Oops, that piece got cut a little funky. What's going on with that? Okay, I'm gonna grab another one of these squares because that's way too off for me to use. I'll be right back. I did end up with some extra cut pieces, but they're all the way across the studio on the other side. I have lost my thread. Alrighty there. Oops, something's going on here. Oh, my thread's all tangled up in my wires. No wonder things are all cattywampus. Well, we're off to a rockin' start this morning, aren't we? Feels like that's always the case when we're coming back from vacation. It's been a couple months since I sat down at my machine. So, of course, everything's going to be all off today. All right. We should be in business now. So much better. I left this seam guide on so I could show you in a bit how much I love using it. It's kind of driving me a little nuts at the moment. I'm a huge fan of chain piecing too. I don't like to cut my thread unless I have to. So I'll go ahead and piece all of the stitch and flip corners for my corner unit here. I'm working on the corner unit in step 1 on page 57, and I'll go ahead and piece all of my stitch and flip corners at once, so then I'm not constantly feeling like I'm going back and forth between pressing and sewing and back and forth. Okay, this thing is driving me a little nuts, so I'm gonna I kept losing last year. I kept losing the little screws that go to this attachment. And so I found, I think this is technically for like a mechanic, but I found these great little magnetized bowls on Amazon. It's got a giant magnet here in the base. And so if I'm going back and forth a lot, or if I'm sewing a ton and just want to be able to set this aside without properly putting it away in its home, this little magnetized bowl is great. Okay. That's not any better. Okay. Ah, the piecing without the arm is. All right, now the thing to keep in mind about the top row of this block is that the whole block has a nice little, I think it ends up being like a 1/2 inch border background fabric around the top. So these corners on the top half of our corner unit, they're not meant to take up this whole side. They are meant to start part of the way down the F rectangle if you're sewing along with us. So I feel like my brain has made so many flying geese lately that I just assume that this should be centered and it should go from corner to corner. And for this block, it doesn't. It starts partway down the side of that background solid rectangle. And this really is one of my favorite blocks in the book. I love how we built some background fabric into the block around the perimeter, so it gives it kind of that natural border. But I also like that we don't have to sew. Let me grab the page so I can show you what I'm talking about. It's kind of hard to see on my printout, but there's a lovely little border built around the outside of the quilt block. And what I really love about that is that let's see if we can get that in the light. There we go. What I really love about it is that we don't have to sew a border around the block itself. It's built into the block because as I'm sewing, once I'm done with my block, I want to be done. I don't want to have to go back and add a border. So it's my ADHD brain at work in my writing. So we built the border directly into the block. But I love too that by having that border in the block, it gives kind of this lovely illusion that the block is kind of floating in space. The block doesn't reach the edge, or the fabric within the block doesn't reach the edge of the block itself. So the other really nice thing about having a border built into your block is that when you go to sew it to its neighbors, you don't have any points to line up, which makes your piecing process so much faster. So that's a big bonus too. All right, we just have a few more of these to go. And then we can get started on piecing the bottom half of the corner unit. Oops, those gave me got a little bit of a crinkle there too. see. Hi there. We have this bundle.
I couldn't remember how you're gonna stuff.
Oh,
So I bought my card just in case.
yeah. Do you want? You can have the plastic bin if you'd like, or
That's okay. I can leave it with you.
okay.
If I use it more than I will, unless you want.
Well, I mean, you can leave it downstairs. I need it back, but
Yeah.
yeah.
No, this is fine.
Awesome. Thank you.
I couldn't remember if it was like little bags that would be
Oh,
tossed in a bigger one. So
yeah. It kind of varies.
no problem.
Thanks. Appreciate it. Okay. Sorry about that. That was our daily pickup for all of the packages. We worked so hard. We so appreciate all the number of orders that came in over our holiday break. And so it took us a couple of days to get all caught up, but we managed to get the last of the holiday orders all set, and most of the orders actually that came in this week too, all set and on their way. So I'm starting on the bottom half of my block 5, the Dahlia block from Flower Farm Sampler. And so these are my H rectangles and F squares. So the H rectangles are a little tricky because they almost are square, not quite. So making sure that I have them longwise. And then these actually do go, the stitch and flip goes from corner to corner. And the extra space is here along the left side of the block instead. Like I said earlier, I try and minimize my trips back and forth between sewing and pressing. So if I have a block that has several, lots of threads there. If I have a block that has several stitch and flip pieces, this one has one in each row of our corner unit. I try and get all of that done at one fell swoop, right at the sewing machine. For me, it takes less brain power to do all of the stitching at once and then all of the pressing at once rather than stitching, pressing, stitching, pressing. So that's just how my brain works. Although sometimes I will break it up if my brain is feeling bored by doing the same thing over and over again, like stitching these. It probably seems like an endless pile of corners. And if I need a break, I can start pressing. It's not too bad. We only have 32 each of these. I was trying to check. I think the Bridget Gardens quilt is like 68 inches square. So it's not a super huge quilt. It does have 2 sets of borders around the quilt top. One is a solid, let's see, do I have a photo? One is a solid border, wider than the binding, but of the same print of the binding. And then one is a floral print border. And because I hate matching prints in border prints, we're using the 108-inch wide coordinating backing fabric. We're using that for our borders. And I just think that that is fantastic. One of the things that it's not wrong, so don't feel like I'm telling you that this is a fault in your quilt if you do this. But one thing that bothers me personally is having a border print, on a large quilt where the pattern is interrupted, because I'm a textile designer in addition to a quilt designer. We work really hard to create really beautiful floral patterns. And so it bugs me personally when that pattern is interrupted in my quilt border. So the solution we came up with was developing several 108-inch wide prints to go with each fabric collection. And so officially those are meant for your quilt backs, because the other thing I hate is piecing a quilt back. But as a bonus, you can use them for borders of your quilt. And because they're 108 inches wide, it's a really easy way to get borders without having to have a seam. Like I said, nothing wrong with having a seam. I just like how it looks to have that print uninterrupted. Got a nice little pile of quilt clippings back there. Two pieces of fabric there. Whew, last one. All right, these got a little curled from being stacked, but that will go back into shape as soon as we press. All right. Feels good to have the building blocks of our corner unit all put into place. All right, these did get a little rumpled, but we'll give them a quick press in a minute. I have tried one of those freestanding thread guillotine type dealy bobs to separate your chains, but I piece with polyester, Decobob, polyester, cottonized polyester thread, and I find that putting the pressure on the thread from that kind of thread guillotine where you know, kind of it's like using the thread snipper on the side of your machine to separate your blocks. And I find that it puts too much tension on my thread and the thread kind of snaps and I have a stitch or two unravel at either end. So, which saves time snipping the pieces apart, but then a lot of times I have to go back and restitch as well. So I just find it easier to separate these by hand. All right. Let's see. Scissors and there it is. Our little corner catcher. Oops. All right. That's a little bit better. Getting everything back into place after a break always feels like it takes me a little while. So some of these got a little rumpled, so I'm just giving them a real quick press, just so it's a little easier to cut them. Now, if you've seen any of my stitch and flip videos over on our YouTube channel, then you'll know that I prefer to trim these off by hand, the excess corner fabric. But if you prefer to trim yours to get that perfect 1/4 inch seam with your rotary ruler and cutter, then you can absolutely do that as well. I'm okay just eyeballing the 1/4 inch seams. And I just realized that I have a plan. I have the concepts of a plan for these triangles. So rather than toss them, I'm gonna set them aside. I have two. Oh, that one feels thicker for some reason. Just to give you a little peek behind the scenes, we are going to be doing a lot of in the quilting and cross stitch crossover realm this year. And one of the things that I am wild about are project bags. And so, because I have all of these and they are all going to be the same. And I love this little holly print so much. I'm going to save my trimmings and see what I can come up with for a holiday bag for some of my winter projects. Now, this fabric collection is my Holly and Hearth fabric collection, and we'll be hitting your favorite local quilt shop in April and May of 2026. And man, it still feels so weird to say 2026, doesn't it? But I was able to get a little bit of yardage to make a couple of promotional projects, including this quilt. And I just love this little holly print so much. I have several wintry cross stitch projects that I'm planning on turning into pillows, and I think I'm going to use this print as the backing for those little cross stitch projects. So, which reminds me, so today is Friday the 9th, and next Tuesday, whatever the date, excuse me, next Tuesday is, we're going to be having our very first floss tube cross stitch width parade or work in progress parade. So I have a whole basket of projects to show you and some stitchy plans for what I'm working on and what I'm planning on doing for the new year. And so we'll be sharing that Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. And we'll share this stream here on Patreon as well. But that is going to be a stream that is live over on our YouTube channel. And that's this coming Tuesday at 9 a.m. And as always, you'll be able to watch the stream if you miss the live feed. So I like keeping these in my little triangle trimmings in pre-matched little pairs because then I can really fly and sew them together and then trim them down into some half square triangles. And like I said, I have an idea for a project bag. I think I'm going to use these for. All right, those aren't quite as rumpled. So now I didn't think of this until now because it just dawned on me as we're sitting here together what I want to use these trimmings for. But if you wanted to, at your sewing machine, you could go back and stitch a second seam half an inch away from this seam on the side that you're trimming off. If you take the time to go back and stitch that second seam half an inch away from the first one, then you would essentially be trimming off ready pieced half square triangle units. So I don't always, if we're being honest, I don't always save my triangle trimmings. I'll often collect them and use them kind of as a display or give them to my kids to do art with, or at least when they were littler, or donate them to the local art recycling studio. Just because these are kind of small in size, but I actually think that they will do really nicely for this idea I have for a project bag. And that's the thing that I love about zippered project bags is that if you're a cross stitcher, of course, they're great for your cross stitch projects. If you're a knitter, you can use them for your yarn projects. You can use them to store your blocks in, or if you're going to a retreat, bring them back and forth. There are like endless possibilities for project bags. The smaller size, like a 6x9, you could use as a makeup pouch or I don't know about you, but I feel like my purse is always a tangle of charging cords and spare headphones and dongles and all of the like accoutrement we carry around to support our techie selves. And so it's always great to have little things like that. So I'm just keeping these in pre-matched pairs, these triangle trimmings, and at some point future me will turn them into half square triangles and trim them down. So that is the one part about making half square triangles that I do not enjoy, is the squaring up and trimming down process. So that's going to need to be when I have a good TV show or podcast that I can just kind of binge and kind of trick my brain into zoning out while my hands stay busy. All right, almost done here. All right, so as I'm piecing a quilt, what I'll often do is take one of these kind of plastic containers. This one's kind of I think it's like a 6x9 or not quite. And I have my, this is technically a plant pot, but it's a thimble. And so I have my little trash base and then my bin for scraps. And I try and keep that kind of just tucked here over to the side of my pressing area as I'm working. And then that way it's all at hand. So I'm really excited. Later this afternoon, I have this great pegboard that I got from IKEA, and I am hanging that behind this area here. So if this is the flat top of my pressing area, I'm going to hang it behind so that I can put all kinds of things like my spare, I have some floating around that you can't see on camera. I have these rotary small mats and shades for blocking glare and like all sorts of random things. So just thought it would be really nice to be able to be working here. And then if I have a tool, just be able to reach out and grab it and then put it back. So one of the things that I struggle with, my brain struggles with, is object permanence. So if I can't see an object, then I either forget that I have it or it takes me a long time to find it. So having my sewing space set up in a way that everything is at hand and I have everything that I need there in the spot, so that I can grab it, really saves me a lot of time. It takes my brain a lot of power to refocus. So if I have to get up and go look for a tool, it takes me a while to kind of settle back into my sewing space. So, I've learned that I have scissors. I might have 3 or 4 pairs of the same scissors, and one pair lives here so that I can grab it as I'm sewing. One pair lives over by my sewing machine so that it's there, and then another pair or 2 live over in the area where I do my cutting, and I have my big stand-up pressing machine, or not machine, pressing area where I can stand up. And I just find that it might seem wasteful to some to have a lot of tools or a lot of repeats of the same tools, but find if I have them in the area and they're always at hand, then I don't have to waste the brain power of going to look for them. So this is a tailor's clapper. I really love it. I have a pile of them. I have some of these great wood ones as well. And I just like to let my blocks cool under a clapper or something heavy. You could use, you want to be careful with the heat, but if you have some old heavy books, like I have some English literature tomes from college that I'll never use again, but are super, big and heavy. Just something heavy that you can leave on your blocks as they cool and they end up staying nice and flat. So I am pressing on, I have a wool felted pressing mat that I love so much. And it does get very thready to vacuum it every so often, but I love that the wool pressing mat absorbs the heat from the iron and reflects it back into the block. And so it just helps your blocks get super nice and crisp. And of course, these, I'm a huge fan of pre-starching my fabric. So all of my fabric yesterday was heavily starched and I let it dry. You know, I starch it when I get into the studio in the morning. If I am cutting fabric for the day, I start the morning off by starching and just kind of saturating the fabric with the starch. And then I kind of just let it sit and air dry. And then by mid-afternoon, it is dry enough that I can iron without having to spend a ridiculous amount of time there. So, okay, I'm going to move these off camera. And then we'll go on to the larger bit. I do absolutely love my Panasonic. Oops, it's a little scuzzy from all of the starch, but I love my Panasonic iron. It's specifically a quilting iron, and so it has a base that it sits on, and as it's sitting on, it's heating up. But it makes it really easy, especially if I'm here filming. It makes it really easy to iron without having to mess with a cord. So I do love the cordless iron for ironing while I'm piecing, but I do have a second pressing station that I have set up with a traditional corded iron, you know, that you don't have to pause and reheat for when I'm finishing up my blocks or as I'm pressing fabric itself or assembling my quilt top. I just like to use the bigger iron. Just put those head to head. And before I can start assembling my blocks, I do need to add one additional, one additional piece to the smaller units. So for now, I'm just going to leave these larger units here to cool, and then I will take these over and we can sew with these. All right. Let's see, do I want... Oftentimes when I am piecing and I don't need to use a pin, I will switch to a sewing machine foot that has a little guide on it. You saw my big guide set up earlier, and I still have more stitch and flip corners to sew, so I'm not going to take the time to put that back on. But I am going to just switch because I don't have any pins right now. The guides make it hard when you have pins. The guides make it hard to sew, but this foot just has, oops, come on thread. This foot just has a nice little guide so that you can feel the pieces butt right up against it as you sew. And it's just a really great way to do that. And then I'll pop my foot back into my magnetic dish. So, oh my gosh, isn't this blue dreamy? I am so in love with this blue. Okay, so to finish the second half of the block, what we're going to be doing is adding our C-square here to the right edge of the block. And so anytime I have a stitch and flip corner like this, where I have a point with a seam intersection and not, this works for half square triangles, this works for stitch and flip corners. This is the part of the block that I want to tack down first. And so I'm going to make sure that that's where I start my seam. And then I don't have to worry about it bunching off. So I am pressing my seams directionally for this block. In general, that's how I prefer to do my piecing. So I don't worry about back stitching at the beginning and end of my block. So if you prefer to press your seams open, then it might be a good idea to back stitch at the beginning and end of each seam. Just a matter of personal preference. If you've been sewing with me for any amount of time, then you know I'm a huge believer in sewing in the manner that works best for you and not following some set of rules somebody made up and telling you what you have to do. So you can see that guide line gives us just a really straight, even stitch. If I get my ruler out, you can see it gives us pretty spot on to a 1/4 inch seam. And I just like it because it's just kind of a set of guardrails. So if I'm doing something else like talking or, listening to a podcast or an audiobook or, chit-chatting with a quilty friend while I'm sewing, that guardrail just kind of is there to help keep my seam nice and crisp, which I appreciate. And it helps kind of prevent your seam. We've all had seams that kind of wobble around a bit, right? So it just kind of helps prevent that. And it does have a little bit, this particular foot does have a tiny screw that you can adjust the arm a little bit. So if you do have this on your machine, before you sit and piece everything, I would highly recommend taking the time to measure to make sure that what you think is a 1/4 of an inch actually is a 1/4 of an inch. Oh, I just love these colors together. All right, we are just flying through these, which always feels good. I always feel like when I'm sitting down to make a quilt that the actual sewing part takes so much longer than I feel like in my head I anticipate it taking. All right, down to our final two here. Oops. off to press. Oops, we didn't. Okay, just checking my pressing instructions. Ah, see? Beautiful. Anytime I have a seam like this where I've pieced two blocks together, I do try and get into the habit of pressing the seam closed first and then pressing it open. It just kind of helps get everything settled in. Put that under the clapper to cool. So most of my blocks, as I'm putting together kind of the building block parts, like these first few steps, I don't pin. I generally don't pin unless the piece of fabric that I'm sewing is huge, like 6 or 8 inches large, or if I have seams to match. So this next little area, I'm going to take the time to do a little bit of pinning. because I'm usually sewing on a super tight deadline, not the case here, but because I usually sew on a pretty tight deadline, I do like to kind of batch the actions that I'm doing. And so rather than pinning and sewing, I do try and batch all the pinning at once. And it just feels like it goes faster. I don't know whether it actually does or not. So in order to get these together like this, we need to match up our points where our seam intersection meets the blue area here with where it will meet this corner a quarter of an inch away. So I've done so many of these that I can just kind of eyeball that quarter of an inch. And it goes pretty quick. All right, there we go. So I'm going to pop off screen for now and finish all of this up. But I do want to thank you. Oops. Getting our computer. I do want to thank you for stopping by this morning and spending a little bit of time here in the studio with me. So if you are a Patreon member at any of our paid levels, you do have access to rewatch this video anytime this month for the month of January, along with several of our other exclusive live Stitch With Me and Sew With Me kind of cross stitchy and quilty meetups. So I want to thank you guys again for joining me. I hope you have a lovely weekend ahead of you, and we will see you next week for our, what am I trying to say? We'll see you next week for our cross stitch work in progress parade. So thank you again so much for joining me, and we'll see you next week.